There is no Shakespeare Authorship Question. This is settled academic thought. The question can no longer be asked. We've answered it for you. I just hold the radical, extreme position that students should be allowed to hear both sides of the debate. And they're not. Okay, then, the year 1664 arrived. Does anyone know why that's insignificant? It's 100 years after the birth of England's greatest writer, Shakespeare's centennial. And?
No one noticed?
No one noticed! Thank you. No one noticed! No, isn't that incredible? 100 years after the birth of William Shakespeare's centennial. Nothing. There were no celebrations, no festivities, no bardolatry. And again, no bardolatry. And still, no one is on record of traveling yet to Stratford-upon-Avon to learn what can be learned about this guy right here, Mr. William Shakespeare. Years passed, then decades. Then gradually there was a reawakening to the brilliance of William Shakespeare's plays. And then finally it occurred to someone to travel to Stratford-upon-Avon and learn what could be learned about the man William Shakespeare. But by then, his wife, his daughters, his granddaughter, in fact, everyone who had actually known the man was long since dead. And more importantly, nothing could be found to demonstrate there'd ever been a great writer in the town. But once these seekers started to come, I'm telling you, they didn't stop. And they kept asking, wanting, demanding. What was the little town to do? The house that Shakespeare had bought to spend his final years in, known as New Place, had been completely remodeled. Shakespeare himself wouldn't have recognized it. That wouldn't satisfy the visitors. And as for the place where Shakespeare was born, many years would pass before the famous house on Henley Street would be selected from the surviving buildings of the town. Shakespeare's probable birthplace, known as Brook House, had already been demolished. What was the little town to do? Visitors couldn't be directed to Shakespeare's monument bust in the church. It hadn't yet been radically altered to show a writer holding a quill. The bust was still in its original form, showing what looked like a businessman holding a sack of grain. What was the little town to do? There was money to be made from these arriving Shakespeare admirers, but unless something was found or invented soon, word would spread that Stratford was a bore, and nothing remained of their once great writer. In this hour of need, along came the greatest of inventors, accident. There happened to be, behind Shakespeare's former house, a beautiful old mulberry tree. The tree looked to be way over 100 years old. It must have been planted around the time Shakespeare lived in the house. Why not tell these seekers of all things Shakespearean that the tree was hand-planted by none other than the great man himself, and that this mulberry was, quote, the last memorial of immortal Shakespeare, unquote. Okay, it was admittedly a long shot. But it was the town's only hope of saving face and creating a lucrative travel destination. Relieved to have finally thought of something, no matter how ludicrous. Everyone in the town started spreading the word. Now every visitor was pointed to the tree. It worked! The tree was so magnificent that only a genius writer could have planted it. The mulberry quickly became regarded as the most valuable asset in the town. Even the greatest Shakespearean actor of his day, David Garrick, came up from London to see what the great man had planted. Finally, Stratfordians had something satisfying to proudly show their guests. For a while. Unfortunately, the owner of Shakespeare's former house and of the mulberry tree was a reverend by the name of Francis Gastrell. It's likely this reverend detested theater and probably Shakespeare's lascivious plays. However, he was initially tolerant of the souvenir hunters. But as time went on, the arrivals at his door swelled and swelled. Many, so many, wanted a piece of the tree and thereby a piece of Shakespeare. Twigs, leaves, branches were broken off. His lawn and garden damaged. The Reverend started trying to chase off the unwanted intruders, but still they came. Finally, the incessant traffic was too much for him. One night, without warning to the town, the good Reverend went out back and chopped down the tree. The next day, the citizens of Stratford were seized with grief and astonishment when they learned of the sacrilegious deed, and nothing less but the destruction of the offender, the miserable culprit. This so-called Reverend would satisfy them. The town rioted, shattering all the windows in Shakespeare's former house. Apparently to the angry crowd, Shakespeare's former house didn't possess any of Shakespeare's spirit, only the blessed mulberry tree. The Reverend was forced to flee the town to save himself from the rage of the Stratfordians. And the story should have ended there. And with it, Stratford's budding tourist industry, and even the myth of William Shakespeare himself. But an enterprising businessman, carpenter, and clockmaker by the name of Thomas Sharp acquired the fallen tree and started carving wood Shakespeare mementos to sell out of his store, which he renamed the Mulberry Shop. The original purpose of the Mulberry fantasy was restored. Visitors could no longer admire the tree or steal twigs and leaves from its branches, but they could now buy authentic Shakespeare mulberry relics. Oh, an astonishing number of items were carved from the tree. Cups, goblets, bowls, ladles, even knives and forks. Then came tobacco cases, toothpick cases, pen cases, needle cases, comb cases, followed by cribbage boards, inkstands, nutmeg graters, tea caddies. So numerous were the items, it's highly unlikely that all of them could have come from a single tree. But each and every one of them was sold with a guarantee it was made from the one true wood. In London, well-authenticated blocks of the celebrated mulberry tree of Stratford began to be sold at auction. This tree possessed incredible powers of self-multiplication. As large tables, even dollhouse-sized replicas of Westminster Abbey were on sale. Back in Stratford, other trees began to disappear. The town's walnut trees were all cut down, and not long after, authentic Shakespeare walnut carvings were on the market. Shakespeare was no longer an actor, a theater manager, or even a supposed poet and playwright. Shakespeare had become divine. And Stratford-upon-Avon was his shrine. In this atmosphere, once Stratford had become a literary sanctuary, the first incipient questions about authorship were raised. Researchers began to find holes in what was now accepted dogma, that the man from Stratford was Shakespeare. There were, in fact, nothing but holes. But who would listen? Certainly not those that had bought expensive mulberry or walnut carvings. Certainly not the town of Stratford itself, which was benefiting mightily from the increased tourist trade. And certainly not the English-speaking world of academia, which had created a literary icon for the ages. And ever since, anyone who's even suggested the heresy that the man from Stratford did not write the works of Shakespeare has been called a crackpot. A crackpot. Trust us. We're the experts. We're the authorities. We know Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. It's beyond all doubt. It's a certain fact. It cannot be questioned. Only a crackpot would suggest otherwise.